Special Federal Executive Council meeting holds today to fine-tune 2020 budget proposal.
Germany pledges strategic partnership to boost Nigeria's health sector.
I just mentioned to them the area of patient transportation, e-health, mobile health, in enhancing the health system of Nigeria and patient and service delivery.
Reproductive health experts caution against high maternal mortality rates in the country.
If you can get people away from getting pregnant unintentionally, then you will certainly reduce maternal mortality.
A lot of the advocacy should also be targeted towards the male population.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the gains of President Buhari's visit to South Africa last week.
Not a few persons wanted Nigeria to apply the an eye for an eye principle or outright reciprocity in dealing with the recent cases of xenophobic attacks on Nigerians living in South Africa sometime last month.
Of course, Kyria, now tensions over the recurrent xenophobic attacks on Nigerians and other African nationals in South Africa actually reached fever pitch. But thankfully, the Nigerian authorities thwarted the threats and a few instances of reprisals here in the country. Exactly what the South African authorities could not, or rather failed to curtail when the attacks sparked off in their own territory.
And if the world was waiting for Nigeria to come hard on South Africa with a sledgehammer, this did not quite happen, as Nigeria rather displayed what some would call diplomatic maturity by offering to engage and help South Africa overcome the age-long problem of xenophobic attacks, or xenophobia generally, which has pitched the former apartheid country against the rest of Africa and perhaps the world.
Well, that's right, Kyria. Now, Nigeria's big brother approach in handling the xenophobic attacks in South Africa with a high sense of diplomacy is quite instructive, and that's, of course, against the background of the fact that some other African nations whose citizens were equally affected by the xenophobic attacks were quick to take a number of actions against South Africa, but Nigeria rather chose the path of caution, especially as insinuations were rife in diplomatic circles that South Africa or its government was oblivious of, or rather taking lightly, the consequences that xenophobia could have not just on that country, but on the continent as a whole.
True, Kingsley, and after some initial thoughtful diplomatic actions, including the dispatch of a special envoy to President Ramaphosa and the voluntary evacuation of Nigerians from South Africa, President Buhari proceeded to South Africa to confront the challenge head-on with Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, turning the challenge to a stepping stone for elevating relations between the two African nations.
Exactly. Now, President Buhari, while in South Africa, did not mince words when he told his counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa, and the South African nation that the attacks were an embarrassment to Africa as a whole and needed to stop forthwith. Also instructive was President Ramaphosa's repeated apology for the attacks, stressing that South Africa actually owed Nigeria a debt of gratitude for the role Nigerians played in emancipating this country from the clutches of apartheid. He specifically said, without Nigeria, freedom for South Africa would have come at a greater cost and at a later date.
It's very interesting that he noted that.
That's right.
And both leaders promised to work closely towards finding lasting solutions to xenophobia in South Africa by setting up early warning mechanisms that will alert authorities of potential inclinations to violence with the aim of nipping them in the bud.
And for the first time, Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission, which had been in limbo, was elevated to the levels of heads of state, where both leaders signed 32 agreements and memoranda of understanding in subject areas such as trade and industry, science and tech, defense, agriculture, energy, tourism, and transport.
Interestingly, too, both countries have agreed to issue 10-year visas to their businessmen, academics, and frequent travelers, as well as re-establish the Nigeria-South Africa Consular Forum involving key ministries of both countries that will meet twice a year to discuss migration and security issues.
On the whole, it would appear that President Buhari waved the proverbial magic wand on the xenophobia saga, and that has now translated to robust engagements and hopefully improved relations between both countries, considered strategic to Africa's growth and development. That's to say, Nigeria and South Africa. But we'll still have to ask, what were the more specific gains of President Buhari's recent visit to South Africa? And what are the implications of the agreements signed last week? And are we likely now to begin to see an end to xenophobic attacks by South Africans?
Well, these are some of the questions our guests will respond to on today's edition of your Good Morning Nigeria show. Thank you for waking up with us this morning. My name is Kirian Umayo.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kirian and also welcome you to the program. We're broadcasting live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. As usual, we'll have our complimentary segments, and these include newspaper review, business, and others. In the meantime, let's join Usman Aliyu for the morning news. Good morning, Usman.
Good morning, Kingsley and Kieran. Here is the details of the morning news. An extraordinary Federal Executive Council meeting will hold today, Monday, October 7, by 12 noon at the Council Chambers of the State House, Abuja. A statement by Presidential Advisor on Media and Publicity, Femi Adesina, says the meeting is to put finishing touches to the 2020 budget, which will still be presented to the National Assembly by 2 p.m. on Tuesday. An Information and Culture Minister, Lai Mohammed, has assured that in this next level of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, the culture and tourism sector will be given all the desired attention to make it play the critical role and contribute to the nation's economic growth. The minister stated this at a media briefing in Lagos.
Within 6 months of assuming office in November 2015, we decided to invite all stakeholders to a meeting tagged the National Summit on Culture and Tourism in April 2016 in Abuja, with a view to charting a new path for the nation's creative industry.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyama, has arrived Namibia on a 2-day official visit. The minister on arrival was received by Nigeria's High Commissioner to Namibia, and Ambassador Lilian Ono and Ambassador Salma Ashpala Musavel. The Executive Director, Ministry of International Relations and Cooperation, Namibia, is expected to meet with his counterpart, Namibia's Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, to discuss bilateral, regional and multilateral issues of mutual interest and concern to Nigeria and Namibia on this Monday. And now to technology. More than 140 countries are participating at the Gulf Information Technology Exhibition GITEX 2019. The exhibition has commenced with much fanfare in Dubai, where Nigeria has exhibited an indigenous innovation. Meanwhile, Nigeria occupies a place in Germany's new global health strategy scheduled to be adopted by the end of 2019. Health Minister of Germany, who was on a visit to Nigeria, met with his counterpart, Dr. Osagi Ehanere, where he outlined polio eradication and strengthening of health security as part of its intervention in the Nigeria's health sector.
Health in enhancing the health system of Nigeria and patient and service delivery.
There are already 5 hospitals in the country here that are supported by our Ministry for Economic Development, so that you can have a train-the-trainer concept, that you can have a cooperation between the hospitals, and that is something we want to deepen and to promote in fighting diseases, especially infectious diseases. Our Centers for Disease Control, our German Robert Koch Institute.
And still talking health, matters records show that Nigerian woman has a 1 in 20 22 lifetime risk of dying during pregnancy, childbirth and unsafe abortion. This is against a 1 in 4,900 lifetime risk in other developing countries.
No matter what the government does to improve economic prosperity, if we do not reduce the growth rate of our population, it will come to nothing.
So if you can get people away from getting pregnant unintentionally, then you will certainly reduce maternal mortality.
Culture, yes, it plays a role. That's, I can say, it is even blending into the religion. That is the root cause of some of the religious misconceptions.
The House of Representatives Committee on Federal Road Maintenance Agency has promised to synergize with the Federal Ministry of Works to reconstruct the collapsed bridge along Federal Polytechnic Road in Ado-Ekiti, which serves as a link between the state and the northern part of the country. Chairman of the committee, Femi Bamisile, gave the indication while on an on-the-spot assessment to the bridge, which has washed away by floods recently.
Meeting, I will make it very clear to him with what we have seen in Ekiti State, which I know is replicated in other states in Nigeria, that all these things needs to be done on time. We don't have to wait until people die.
And on a sad note, more than 10 persons lost their lives along Kaduna-Kachia Road in a fatal accident involving 2 vehicles. Eyewitness account says the accident caused by overspeeding resulted in the death of some persons. And that's all we can take in the news this morning. We'll join Kinsley and Kieran for the continuation of your favorite breakfast show. Over to you. That will be after this break.
Indomitables game on Google Play Store. Search the Indomitables on Play Store and download now. Indomie noodles, tasty nutrition, good for you.
The new edition of TV Guide is out, exclusively taking a look at the traditional television and new media. Are they comparable or complementary? Media industry players give perspective on the trends, progress, challenges, and the way forward. Find out on this compelling edition of TV Guide. Expository interviews with stars of the team within our space. Becky Madojemo of NTA, Utibe Umore of AIT, Nifemi Oguntai of TVC, and a host of others. TV Guide, your indispensable companion. Also feature Iya Modina.
I'm the CEO and managing director of Iya Modina Sister Restaurant. I ask you to shut up your mouth. Let me finish.
A TV drama series on NTA. Let's get to meet the characters behind Iya Modina. This edition also presents exciting features on tourism, culture, entertainment, sports, health, and lots more. Grab a copy at the vendors near you or any NTA station nationwide. TV Guide, your indispensable companion.
When you wake up in the morning, before you start your day, breakfast time is Kellogg's time. For work and for play, for a great start to your day, breakfast time is Kellogg's time.
We always start our day with a nourishing Kellogg's breakfast, powered with the goodness of grains and 11 essential vitamins and minerals. So in our family, breakfast time is Kellogg's time.
Breakfast time is Kellogg's time.
In Nigeria, there is one sound we need to silence. So let's silence toothache before it starts with Oral-B All-Round Protection. Its advanced technology helps prevent both tooth hose and gum problems that can lead to tooth loss. It strengthens your teeth, giving them all-round protection. Because the only sound we really want to hear is that of our future. For healthier, stronger teeth in 1 week.
e don reach 50 years now when that program wey they call village headmaster begin. Una know the program now. That program when all of una dey run go home go look for na television.
I want you now to formally tender your apology to Headmaster Ali for causing him so much embarrassment.
Na 50 years now. So because of that, we won't get big party. Now me and my body invite you now, and my belly just is sweet. Because I don't say all those people they drink my party, then go come drink the tombo again. And me radio Jamebo, they call you now, but you not forget.
You are still watching Good Morning Nigeria. Now let's talk business. Economic experts have reiterated that inclusive economic growth and business development globally are premised on the viability of micro, small and medium enterprises while calling for greater attention to MSMEs. Details with Kolo Mohammed on Business News.
Small and medium enterprises have been discovered to be the key drivers of a country's economic growth and development globally. When Nigeria's federal government launched the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, it highlighted small and medium enterprises in strategies to drive inclusive growth. Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, launched a micro, small and medium enterprises clinic across the country to pull together different strands of imperatives responsible for the viability of micro, small and medium enterprises.
All of us are doing it for the betterment of the country, and all of us are doing it for the increase of the economy of the country and prosperity of Nigerians.
Gone are the days when individuals will believe that when I graduate, I will be looking for a job. The mindset of Nigerians youth today has changed, and this is favorable to Nigerians, and it is favorable to the government as well.
Economically speaking, as more businesses spring up, an increase in employment is recorded, and this expands the grid of the tax net, putting more money at the government's disposal for the good of all. The right of the taxpayer is also sufficiently protected, as only correct assessment is ensured to be handed taxpayer. And where clearance is needed, the Tax Appeal Tribunal says it should be approached.
The whole of it is to create a situation whereby there is fairness, there is a speedy process of resolving the dispute, and also in a manner that is affordable to the taxpayer.
Anti-corruption and transparency, they say, improves the credibility of business process. The personnel of the Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDEN, say they are expanding the Anti-Corruption and Transparency Unit of the agency to zonal offices.
Corruption is a complex social, political and economic phenomenon that adversely affects all our countries. It undermines democratic institutions, slow economic development.
Activities on the floor of the stock market opens for the week today, and as always, NTA Business News will bring you details of closing figures subsequently. That's businesses at this time. Be with you again soon.
Many thanks, Kolo Mohammed, for the business package. Up next for us is a review of the papers we have this morning.
Now, Bayo Atoyabi, our reviewer, is already here in the studio with us. Bayo, good morning. And welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. I hope you had a nice weekend.
Thank you very much.
It was a great sporting weekend, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, with great results as well, and surprises here and there, and now,
that's what makes sports tick.
Exactly. Let's start with the leadership newspaper. The lead story this morning on the paper is foreign firms invest 278 billion naira in Nigeria's equities market. With a rider as international oil companies resist federal government's move to recover unremitted $21 billion. Details of that story on page 4. Then National Assembly ready for budget presentation tomorrow. And now the fruit of the newspaper. Governor Bello Faleke reconcile. It's on page 7. And then ICPC recovers 900 billion naira constituency project funds. Page 33 is where you get the full details of that. Now, repentant bandits to surrender arms in Katsina. That's on page 11. ASU splits into factions. Page 12 has the story. And Mercy emerges winner of Big Brother Nigeria. Okay, it's on page 5.
Okay, let's take a look at the front page of the Punch newspaper. The lead story is on the split in ASU. It says, faction emerges in ASU, lecturers attack varsity heads. Details of that story can be found on page 20, but with two riders, we will ensure stable academic calendar. That's according to the Splitter Group. And federal government has no hand in ASU faction, says Education Ministry. Now, the two photographs you see there from the same scene say Ekiti communities cut off as flood destroys bridge. That's on page 7. Ekiti communities cut off as flood destroys bridge. And right below that, 3 headlines. Tribunal rules in the GMS petition against Otom today, and 5 burnt in Kaduna-Kachia road crash. No ethnic group has monopoly to rule Nigeria. That's according to Bakari. And then above the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, let's take some other headlines there. PFAs, that's pension fund administrators, record 1.69 trillion naira profit from pension fund investments. Details on page 49. Special FEC meeting on 2020 budget holds today. Vehicles raised as Kogi, APC and PDP supporters clash. Details on page 37. Ex-NHIS boss fails to return 150 million naira vehicles after sacking. That's on page 2. Bayo.
Well, the Federal Executive Council were expected to have a special session on Saturday. Somehow it was postponed. It is to be held today. And from all indications, the 2020 budget will be laid before the joint session of the National Assembly by Mr. President tomorrow. Talking about the faction in ASU, there has evolved a Congress of University Academics, CONWA. This is a splinter from the Academic Staff Union of Nigeria University. The national coordinator, Niyi Ismail, says that they are taking the initiative at a meeting in Obafemi Awolowo University. They said CONWA is formed to formulate a new approach of engagement to address welfare of members. Secondly, they also want to put an end to the unnecessary wasting of students' academic time due to frequent strike action. It has membership in 5 universities. Most of them are state and federal universities. Minister of Labour and Employment, Dr. Chris Ngige, has clarified that the union has not been registered. However, he confirmed that the ministry has received their application and the committee has been instituted to look into it. There's been some development about the students that were adopted, 6 students, 6 female students, and their staff at Engraves College in Kaduna. Initially, they had earlier on demanded a ransom of 50 million for the 6 students and the 2 staff, the vice principal and the matron. However, Kaduna State government converged all the parents to ensure that negotiations will be one direction so that they will be able to sort that out. However, the abductors got in touch with a contact person from the college and said that they have changed their position. They are now demanding 10 million naira per each student and also 10 million naira each from the relations of the 2 staff. The kidnappers said they were incensed by what they heard, reported on international radio, BBC to be specific, and therefore they have changed their strategy. They actually confessed that they were the ones that were responsible for the kidnap of some expatriate recently in that same state. They told officials of the school involved that they bargain that they are not interested in collective bargaining any longer. So the sad thing is that among the 6 students that have been kidnapped, 2 sets of them are of 2 girls, 2 sets, 2 girls each are from the same parents.
Aye. Well, that's really...
Meanwhile, the Government Girls Secondary Science Technical College, that you remember, it has been shut down. The Parent Teacher Association called for a shutdown of the school because of concerns on security. It may be recalled that just over last weekend, the insurgents had attacked the palace of the Emir of Jajere. There are indications also that they have moved closer to towns closer to Dapchi. Therefore, the Parent Teacher Association and the college met and took a resolution based on the advice from the Joint Task Force commander in the area that it's better to ask the children to go home. And therefore, the school has been closed for now.
That's a kind of a precautionary measure.
Yes, it's very important. The development, yes, the development in ASUU is a significant one. Now, it turns out that the application for registration of the new union known as CONUA, that's the Congress of University Academics. The application was filed about 6 months ago, in April this year. And it's being processed still by the Ministry of Labor and Employment. I said the minister says a committee has been set up. Is this likely to be a game changer in what we have seen with regard to the way ASUU had tried to handle its affairs and those of its members and its engagement with government?
And again, what is important before Bayo comes in is the fact that it's just in 5 universities. The members are drawn from just 5 universities out of over 100.
Oh, those are founder members.
Founder members. So I think that the eligibility for registration is what the question is now.
Well, there are two perspectives. First of all, it is an embarrassment to members of the academic community, frequent strike, which many of them don't like, but they have to. Specifically, many of them too are parents and they have children also in the school. But the circumstance is such that the way ASUU is organized is causing a lot of problems for them. You recall that some universities have stayed out of it. For instance, University of Ilorin has never joined any strike. And at the last strike that ASUU called, some universities refused because it was very close to the examinations. And they felt that they owed some obligation to the students, and therefore it was rather unsavory to go on strike at that critical time. So since that time, there have been gradual restiveness among the academics about the frequency of the thing. But the fact still remains that the demands they have, as genuine as they are so cumulative that they cannot be met. Otherwise, the whole resources of the nation will be in serious jeopardy. But there has to be a way out. But this is one of the parts out of it. Apparently, yes, they believe that their entitlement should be paid, but the procedure adopted by ASUU is what these ones are frowning at.
Yeah, what you have said that makes a lot of sense is the fact that it's a accumulation of things undone in the past by many other administrations before now. So for you now to say, look, all that will be paid once, it's practically impossible if you ask me.
Yeah, that's in terms of the demands that ASUU makes, but it is the strategy of ASUU that has been a source of concern to parents and to even academics. A number of very senior professors are often silent because they don't want to be seen to be betraying their colleagues, but in private, they will tell you that they repudiate the tactics that ASUU has generally adopted, the one of frequently going on strike, prolonged periods. Yes, ASUU will also argue that without those strikes, they might never have been able to achieve the milestones that I've recorded in terms of extracting commitments from government and then actually getting government to honor some of those commitments in recent years. But the reputational harm arising from that has been not just to the educational system, but also to the academics themselves. I mean, you go out and your colleagues are just wondering who exactly, you are in terms of the way you guys run your system. But there's a problem, one other problem that arose, and I think we've had cause to point this out, Kieran and Bayo, when we're discussing matters relating to us. Some of the demands, you ask yourself, okay, now everybody goes on strike. They say we are all one. Injury to one is injury to all. When you say that, let's look at it this way: the cumulative arrears that government, hasn't paid or hasn't defrayed, they call it end allowances or so. Fine, you're good if you are in a federal university. That applies to you. But is it also the case that lecturers who are in state universities are also owed end allowances? The options usually were that in most cases they were not owed. But in the meantime, those state university lecturers will also join the strike.
Right. And this has generally affected the quality of education at the tertiary level in the country. When we say that today, some graduates cannot write an application, some graduates cannot express themselves properly.
One of the consequences of that is that there's been a migration of students from public universities to private universities.
Those who can afford
yes.
it.
And there's also a challenge. You have lecturers, qualified lecturers, that are spread thinly across the ground. Presently, the National Universities Commission and some of the universities have had to put conditions that because many universities now, especially among the private universities, have to depend on what they call off-campus lecturers, visiting lecturers. So they have now set a condition. You cannot take off-campus visiting lecturer beyond a distance of 200 kilometers from your location.
How would they know? It's just
no. Well, I mean, if you have a profile, I mean, we don't want to get into details of how some of these institutions try to get accreditation for their courses in terms of what they do with their manpower, poaching, temporary deployment. But what is critical in terms of CONUA, that's what they are called now, the Congress of University Academics, is still inchoate in the sense that it's not been registered, but they are floating it. But obviously, whatever comes out of the application for registration as a trade union for academics, it just shows that ASU itself has to now look inward and say, look, how long more can we proceed with the typical Aluta continuum approach? I mean, you've used it to achieve some results, but it also costs quite some harm.
And ASU might as well go to court, to challenge the new emerging.
It will be a waste of his time and his resources.
Well, they could also allege that it's a divide and rule strategy to break their ranks.
Exactly.
Divide and rule says who?
Let's go to editorial.
So they have no right, to associate?
Well, you had a similar situation evolving from the NLC, TUC, and the others coming up.
No, those are umbrella federations.
Yes.
Those are not specific unions.
Is there no act establishing ASU?
ASU is not established by ASU. ASU is established under the Trade Unions Act. ASU is a trade union. That is one of many trade unions under, for instance, under TUC. You have a number of trade unions like Pengasan and so on and so forth. Yes. Okay. Well, we'll see how matters unfold. Let's take the editorial. This one is coming at page 15 from the Daily Sun newspaper. Upward review of banks' loan ratio. Let's take a bit of it. It's as part of efforts to boost credit lending and stimulate economic growth. The CBN last week increased the minimum loan deposit ratio of commercial banks to 65%. This is up from 60%, and that the ratio is a portion of customers' deposits that is given out as loans. And the banks were given September 30th to comply with the directive. Of course, there have been sanctions and consequences. Bayo.
Well, the increase was from 60% to 65%, and some banks are already crying that it's a burden. But the intendment of that is that it is intended to stimulate growth, encourage the banks to give out loans. After all, the banks will now have to lend what customers deposit to people who want loans, particularly to stimulate growth in the economy. The whole idea, it is expected, will improve the gross domestic product of the nation. And the editorial cites instances. I say South Africa, for instance, their own lending rate, our own is 65, Their own is 91. Kenya across there also has 76. Japan is about 70. So they are still saying that even with 65 for Nigeria, a nation that is desirous of growth, it is still low. But let's see how far they will go. There's a deadline by December, and we hope that they will all respond to it. And it is a strong impetus if you want the kind of hypodermic needle that the economy needs to generate growth.
Well, it's been a recurrent issue that Nigerian banks appear not to be stimulating the business sector by offering loans or advancing facilities for the real sector, and that's been a major challenge. Instead, part of what you always saw with banks was there are huge investments in government securities, such as treasury bills and bonds, where the risk is virtually nil.
Yes.
For you to now advance facilities to the private sector, you will never get those facilities, and that's always been a major challenge, which is why you saw the CBN itself now getting into funding of SMEs and all kinds of transactions that are supposed to be in the province of commercial banks.
The banks will also be, make sure that their customers' monies deposited with them are properly utilized. If you give a loan and you don't get the loans paid back, it's a problem. So they're also struggling to survive in the economic milieu.
That's why you need due diligence before you advance. There are credit guidelines.
I agree with you. Due diligence is necessary because taking loan is not the problem. Repaying the loan is the challenge. We know what APCOM is facing now.
That's right.
Yes. So unless we have that discipline, that if you take a loan, you have a responsibility to pay. And also, the lending rate are quite discouraging. They are a little high. And that is, if you must stimulate growth.
All right, Bayo, let's cut it off here so that we don't appear as if that we are potential applicants for
loans.
for banking loans. Bayo Achebe, thanks a lot for being around.
Thank you too.
We'll see you tomorrow. Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we shall be looking at the takeaways from President Buhari's state visit to South Africa last week.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
The NTA ETV Annual Expo is here again. This time, it's the 13th edition with the theme Promoting Unity and Innovations in Youths as Agents of Change Through Science and Arts. It promises to be captivating as youths across the nation showcase their unique skills and innovations in science and arts, make new friends, and showcase their rich cultural heritage. Join us at the NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja from Sunday 20th October to Thursday 24th October 2019. For more information, participation, and sponsorship, please call these numbers. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
The Aerial Assurance Challenge.
Oh, thank you. But what assurance can you give our daughter?
Everything. With the new look Aerial, I can even do the laundry.
Prove it then.
Okay. Let's make this stain even tougher. Now, let's wash the cloth with your detergent and with new look Aerial. Do you believe me now? Aerial, now in a new look pack.
What we are really cultivating here is a better future for all Nigerian women, and it's not always easy. Panadol Extra relieves headache, backache, joint pain, toothache, and menstrual pain. The pain is worth it.
Well, thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. Our discussion segment this morning focuses on President Buhari's visit to South Africa to tackle the knotty issue of xenophobia and the robust engagements and agreements that emanated from the three-day visit of the Nigerian leader. To kickstart the conversation this morning, here is Oyemi Ajayi with a background report.
The visit of Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari to South Africa has been widely commended by many, who see it as a bold move to champion the end of xenophobic attacks on foreigners, especially Nigerians in South Africa. President Buhari was able to express Nigeria's displeasure about the recurring menace in dire need of urgent attention. The Nigerian leader did not mince words when he told his counterparts, Cyril Ramaphosa, and the South African nation that the attacks were embarrassment to Africa as a whole and needs to stop forthwith.
Mr. President, we have condemned in the strongest terms attacks against Nigerians and other African nationals living in South Africa, the looting of their shops and businesses and burning of their properties.
Instructively, President Ramaphosa reiterated his country's apology for the attacks, as well as the fact that South Africa actually owes Nigeria a debt of gratitude for the role Nigerians played in emancipating his country from the claws of apartheid. In fact, the South African leader acknowledged that attaining freedom from apartheid could have been longer and could have come at a greater cost, but for the historic and brotherly role played by Nigerians across board. Both leaders promised to work closely towards finding lasting solutions to xenophobia in South Africa by setting up early warning mechanisms to alert authorities once such act is perceived, with the aim of nipping in the bud potential inclinations to violence.
Our countries must continue to participate in promoting peace and security agenda for the continent.
For the first time, the Nigeria-South Africa Binational Commission, which had been in existence for nearly 20 years, was elevated to the level of heads of state, where both leaders signed 32 agreements and memoranda of understanding, especially in the areas of trade and industry, science and technology, defense, agriculture, energy, transportation and tourism, with the hope of strengthening cooperation in peace building, good governance and sustainable development in Africa. This is part of efforts to re-establish the Consular Forum, which is a structured arrangement where both governments meet regularly, at least twice in a year, to discuss welfare of citizens. President Buhari, who also met with Nigerians in South Africa, urged them to remain law-abiding and respect constituted authorities where they reside. The visit bettered the agreement between both countries to issue 10-year visas to businessmen, academics, and frequent travelers. With this historic meeting between both leaders, as well as the 32 agreements signed, can this be said to be the end of xenophobia in South Africa? How effective can the early warning mechanism be? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be providing answers shortly.
Now we have guests with us here in Abuja and also Lagos and elsewhere. And I would like to start by introducing, first of all, Mustafa Lawal. Mustafa Lawal is the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mustafa, it's good to have you this morning.
Good morning,
Good Morning, Nigeria. Good morning. And also Garba Shehu, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity, is also here with us. You're welcome, sir.
Morning, Kirian.
Okay, and we also have Professor Hakeem Tijani. Hakeem Tijani is the Professor of Diaspora, Peace and Labor Studies. He is also the Director of Special Duties Center at the National Open University of Nigeria. We're glad to have you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning.
All right, and then from our Lagos Network Center, I would like to welcome Honorable Abike Dabiri Erewa, Chairman, CEO, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. Honorable Abike, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much and good morning. Nice to be with you this morning.
And joining us via Skype from Windhoek, the capital of Namibia, is Godwin Adaba, who is Nigeria's Consul General in Johannesburg, but is currently in Namibia for some diplomatic engagements. It's Godwin Adaba, pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning.
All right, the Skype connection is pretty clear, so we'll take maximum advantage of it before we lose it. We know that you have some good location there. But I just wanted let's begin this conversation with the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that's Ambassador Mustafa Suleiman. Ambassador Suleiman, we're discussing the takeaways from President Buhari's 3-day visit to South Africa last week. How challenging or otherwise was it to pull this off against the background of the widespread dissatisfaction with the latest round of xenophobic attacks by native South Africans against other Africans and in particular Nigerians?
Well, of course it was a little challenging coming at a time when we witnessed this spate of violence against foreigners in South Africa, especially Nigerians. But again, bearing in mind that Nigeria, South Africa has had very cordial and strategic partnership and relations over the years, we built on that framework to be able to address the challenge of the violence against foreign nationals in South Africa. Now, in that wise, having reviewed the bilateral relations and binational commission, which is the platform for addressing almost all issues, all diplomatic relation issues and any other irritant that may have emerged along the line. We built on that and generated a discussion on the binational commission. Luckily, the binational commission has been upgraded to the level of presidents, and which also gave us, a very good leverage to bring in together both senior officials and ministers, and then, the presidents at that level. So we're able to table most of the issues, including the subsisting agreements that would have addressed some of the challenges that gave rise to the incidence of violence in South Africa. So it was quite, a good platform, a good framework to be able to address the issue of violence against Nigerians in particular, and address general issues of diplomatic relations, and try to establish, a proper, framework that will deal with these issues as they emerge. Therefore, that also dovetailed into the kind of decisions that were taken at the end of the BNC.
Okay, thank you. And that's born out of a diplomatic arrangement now. What you have told us now is at diplomatic level. And many Nigerians would have thought that there should be agreements or engagements with respect to what happens to the ordinary people at the level where people cohabit, coexist on streets of South Africa on daily basis, engage in businesses and what have you. And for that, I'd like to bring in Garba Shehu here. Whatever diplomatic meetings and agreements reached in that meeting, how does it translate to bringing about normalcy among Nigerians and South Africans and, of course, other nationals living in South Africa?
Well, it's not difficult to see this, considering that, yes, Nigerians had felt aggrieved over the years against South Africa in particular, and many African nations. There is a sense among our people that we had done so much for our brothers in South Africa, and there is very little we are getting in return. And this violence had come to escalate, aggravate, that feeling. I think the importance of what happened in the 3 days of the president's visit is, first of all, the recognition expressly made by the South African presidency that they recognize this inequality, the fact that you have big South African corporations doing business in Nigeria without any molestation and making the most and the best of it. And the most our people are making in South Africa, they are basically into small scale and medium enterprises. So structurally, there is imbalance in the relationship. And they are saying that they are prepared to make correction in this regard. And you also consider that we have had complaints. Nigerian banks, they don't have where to stand in South Africa. Our airlines, they complain they are not, when you consider South African Airways is into our airspace, we are not getting a fare. All the doors that have been closed against Nigeria have been opened arising from this visit. So there is a sense that there shouldn't be any more anxiety on the part of our people, that the South Africans, if there were mistakes in the past, they apologized and they said corrections will be made. These things will never ever happen again.
I'm wondering, just before we bring in the other guests, I want to return to Ambassador Mustafa Suleiman. You know, summits, of course, can have their own optics. But preparatory to the summits, where you have the officers of other ranks and then the ministers meeting, there could be glitches. Against the background of the earlier question I asked you, was it easy to pull off? I mean, was there a meeting of the minds to say, look, all right, now we know that ordinarily we should have brotherly relations, but our relations have been soured over the years, and our people have been unnecessarily, maligned, attacked, and sometimes killed.
Yeah. See, I think the approach was quite, good for such a moment. If you look at it in terms of the structure of the various meetings that we have had. At the senior officials meeting, that is when most of these issues were discussed. And they were discussed along the lines of saying, okay, which kind of agreements have we had before that have established protection for other citizens that are living in South Africa? That is one. And for us, we wanted to establish a more people-to-people relations than government-to-government, because that's where, the interactions and the interface really happen. So to establish people-to-people relations, you have to come up with agreements that are people-oriented, because they are the people who are engaging themselves within each other's countries. And as such, we looked at all the agreements and say, okay, out of these agreements, which components of these agreements deal with people-to-people relations? Do we need to establish their status as at now? What do we need to amend? What do we need to introduce? And that's where I was saying those kind of discussions gave rise to other new agreements or potential agreements. And the early warning, came in. And the attention to, like my senior colleague said, in terms of what are Nigerians involved in. They are mostly involved in small, medium, micro enterprises, whereas discussions in certain agreements were for big businesses. Now, if you are discussing with the big businesses, you need to come down to the level of small, medium enterprises. What protection are you going to give? What remedies are you going to introduce if there are irritations among the people-to-people relations that we have? Now, those are the issues, and it's easy to agree because we know that we are coming from the background where specifically there is an act of violence against Nigerians and their businesses. So, moving the discussion towards remedies in that regard and anticipating them and providing solutions well ahead of time. And then when they happen, who takes responsibility? The issue of accountability and responsibility by those who perpetrated it, either as state agents or as people within, those countries. So those were the issues that we tried to establish throughout our senior officials meeting, which we also handed over to the ministers and which we made recommendations to the highest level.
Yes, so what I want to take away from your submission with South Africa.
Signing of agreements, beyond all the sitting with top government officials, it's important to now go down to the people. So what the Commission will be doing will be a follow-up. There's never been a problem with government-to-government relationship in South Africa. It's very important to now go to the people, communicate with them, make them understand what is going on. And in that regard, we'll be working with the mission in Joburg and our consulate in Joburg and the mission in Pretoria to ensure that we now take the message to the people, a people-to-people partnership, socio-cultural relationships. Let's get to understand one another. That person who is attacking the other person, the other black person, should understand that that black person is not his problem. So it's important to now go to the local level, a lot of education. And the key thing about what happened in South Africa, the early warning signal mechanism that had been agreed on about 2 years ago will now be fully implemented, which means when there's going to be a problem, somebody somewhere will be alerted. And then you also remember that the police were also involved in this particular visit with the Minister of Police Affairs on the delegation. So it's important to get cooperation from the South African police. It's okay. Well, it's not okay, but it's a bit more difficult to understand the fact that the policeman is actually perpetuating violence against other blacks. That's not acceptable at all. So the fact that the police involvement is there, and the fact that South Africa has also now promised that there will be consequences for actions. I mean, if you deliberately violate somebody's rights and assault the person, then there must be consequences for their actions. And some people are already in court in particular policemen in court for their crime against Nigerians in South Africa. I mean, with what has happened, it is imperative that these cases are done with. And then, most importantly, is that Nigerians in South Africa were very happy at the president's visit. In fact, like one of them said during the town hall meeting, he said, "Mr. President, thank you for bringing our dignity back." So it's important for the Nigerian in South Africa to walk high and tall and do what they are there to do. However, while we admit that there were a few cases of those involved in drugs or crime and all that, part of the agreement was arrest them, deal with them. We are not going to tolerate that. But that 1% should not, spoil the whole bunch. So it's been a very successful meeting. And like I said, most importantly, we'll continue education, at the level of the people themselves. And there are some programs that will be coming up in that regard, both in Nigeria and South Africa.
Okay, Honorable Abike, thank you. But I was just wondering, we've had you on Good Morning Nigeria in the past, talking about the condition of Nigerians in different parts of the world, and even specifically in South Africa. From what you saw over the 3 days of the president's visit and the various engagements, is the outcome of this visit likely to be a game changer in terms of relations, people to people and government to government?
Absolutely. I believe so. It was thorough. It was detailed. And, there was political will on the part of South Africa to do something about xenophobia. In the past, you hear top government officials from South Africa say, well, we're not practicing xenophobia. We're doing nothing wrong. But this engagement by both presidents would go a long way in ensuring that all these things come to a stop. So the key thing is the political will on the part of South Africa to say we're not going to tolerate this anymore. So I think that went down very, very well, and I believe this really should be a game changer. And the thing is, as was said in South Africa there by both presidents, only Africans can solve Africa's problems. So if these two giants in Africa work together, we can only develop the continent for the overall good and benefit of every one of us as Africans. So it was a very, very thorough event. What was signed was very, very thorough and detailed, and the two ministers of the two countries will continue to follow up and ensure that we really do achieve the aims of this presidential visit. And then twice a year they'll be meeting. The Binational Commission and senior officials will be meeting twice a year. The next meeting will take place in Nigeria. So if those engagements continue, if those conversations continue, it will help the relationship between Nigeria and South Africa, and also particularly ensure that xenophobic attacks in South Africa against Nigerians in particular and Africans in general, should be a thing of the past.
All right, we'll return to you in the course of the program for you to clarify or elucidate on the mechanisms that are available for these agreements to trickle down to the streets of South Africa. where Nigerians live with them. Now, let's go to Namibia, where we have Godwin Adama, Nigeria's Consul General in South Africa, who is on a special diplomatic engagement in Namibia. So you've been talking to us ever since this saga, commenced last month, and of course we've listened to some of the issues you raised and the means of addressing them. Now, the meeting between Nigeria's president and that of South Africa, you have all agreed, was so meaningful and significant. To you, what is the takeaway? You've listened to Abike talking about mechanisms that are put in place now to ensure that the agreements really reach to the roots, to ensure that we don't have a repeat of xenophobia attack. What is your own takeaway from the meeting? You live in South Africa, so you understand them more than we do.
Yeah, good morning once again. Yes, like my permanent secretary has just said, because of course he participated and co-chaired the senior officials meeting and participated at the ministerial meeting, so he has said all about that. I'm more concerned now about the consular issues, that is people-to-people relations between the two countries. And I believe that the visit of the president and the meeting of the Binational Commission has kind of created a new hope for Nigerians. Since the departure of Mr. President, a lot of them have called me to appreciate the fact that the meeting was a great success and their hope has been rekindled, and they are now going to live in a more secured environment. A number of them too, even yesterday there was supposed to be an issue somewhere, and in the spirit of the early warning mechanism, even though not yet fully operational, they had alerted me, and I had also made some calls, and we are monitoring the process so that it does not lead to any issues of crisis at all. I believe now Nigerians are more focused, they are more encouraged to see and relate with their officials in such a way that they believe that their lives and properties will be protected. We are also moving ahead to carry out some stakeholders meetings among us as Nigerians, and to be able to look at the issues of the past, the present, and plan for the future. And in doing that too, we are going to look at some of the issues, the underlying factors setting that sometimes create the crisis, like those involved in crimes and all that, and then we'll speak with our people and we'll see how we can tackle that to also avoid areas of crisis. I'm going to, once we settle down, we are also going to begin to meet Nigerians in the various provinces to have such stakeholders meetings. And doing that will help us to be able to
all right. We got a freeze there from the Skype connection in Windhoek with Godwin Adama. I'm sure once they're able to clear that up, well, we understand it's back. So, Mr. Godwin Adama, continue.
Yes, and then of course, also some of the locals here, some of the officials in the local, they have reached out to me. They want to be part of such meetings because I've told them that we are going to have some stakeholders meetings with our people. And sometimes they say where it is possible, they will not mind to be part of such meetings so that they could also reassure our people and see that whatever is likely to create a crisis, they will collectively assist to nip them in the bud. And that is the situation at the moment.
Mr. Godwin Adama, thank you very much. We'll return to you in the course of the conversation. Let's now come to Professor Hakeem Tijani, who is the Director of Special Studies Center at the National Open University. He's also a Professor of Diaspora, Peace and Labor Studies. Professor Hakeem Tijani, is this likely to be a new beginning in terms of relations between Nigeria and South Africa, governmental level and people to people?
Thank you very much for having me. I strongly believe it is indeed a new beginning. But let me first of all commend the powerful presidential visit to South Africa and the initiative, that came about as a result of that. But crave the indulgence of, the audience and the listeners to say this. We have to be very careful about fake media. The SSA, Malam Garba, and the Honorable Abike Dabiri made mention of that in their comments previously. And I want to stress that because of what has happened in the last few weeks. And I'll give an example. That first, fake media is really, really, really one of the impediments towards achieving, this initiative and then forging ahead. What do I mean? Some few weeks ago, NIDCOM, that is the Nigerian Diaspora, Commission, had a conference, a kind of a mini conference whereby the gentleman that was attacked by the police in South Africa was invited. And I was invited. It took place at the Presidential Villa. The president of NANS, the Nigerian Association of Nigerian Students, whatever, was also there. And then we talked, and we strongly believe in diplomacy. From my perspective, diplomacy, Abike Dabiri, diplomacy. The young man that was even attacked, that we must engage people to people, government to government. But you fast forward a week after, when the students called for retaliation, and then of course some South African businesses were attacked in Lagos and what have you. And you can see a fake media, in my opinion, showing my face without the audio, and then boom, showing the NANS president, talking about they must live 24 hours, 48 hours, which of course we admonish him that it's not feasible. The reality must be understood by all. So such information, in my opinion, was trying to validate or using me as a teacher to validate what a student or student body are saying that is just not practicable. So we got to be very, very careful to dissect, understand, and what have you. So having said that, I think the most important thing to forge ahead is knowledge. I was in South Africa the week that fake media came up, okay? And why was I in South Africa? I was UNISA, interestingly interrogating peace education in Africa. We just got a grant from Arts and Humanities Council in UK. And we were talking about peace. And I was at UNISA, University of South Africa, and I started getting calls. Oh, are you safe? I said, look, it's as if something is happening in the backwater. I will say, pardon me, let's say Ajegunle, and you think it's affecting people in maybe VI, okay? But what is important is that most of the areas, if not all the areas, whether Cape Town, Durban, Joburg, where you have these ugly incidents, and indeed in Lagos, where you have the touts taking over a good cause for protest, has to do with those that are lacking education or knowledge. So we must go back to the basis. What has transpired since 1994 has the South African government been able to revise the curricula? The Bantustan education, gated by the apartheid system, how far have they been able to revise and begin to teach? Do we have a component or something similar like NIDCOM and Nigerian Orientation Agency that can assist in informal education? So you can speak at the higher level, but you must trickle down. This situation can only be controlled, and a better future can only be assured, in my opinion, when you take it from bottom up. In other words, knowledge that we generally call education is the key. An informal one, not necessarily sitting in the four walls of the classroom.
Okay, thank you indeed. Please permit me, gentlemen and lady, to return to Godwin Adama, because I want him to clarify some of the things that he told us a short while ago. For instance, you have mentioned the fact that you are now going to be holding meetings with Nigerians in different provinces to be able to also listen to their complaints and see how you use your diplomatic connections to deal with whatever issue that is arising. But that's one thing very important. We spoke to one of the returnees from Lagos sometime last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, and he told us a typical story of a street life. He said that if you are walking on the street, that about 2 or 3 guys can just accost you and slap you, especially when they feel that you are doing better than they do. They'll slap you. And the other lady that we interviewed told us that she was a tailor. She had a tailoring company, and the South Africans patronize her. But when it comes to this xenophobia thing, everybody changes automatically. Now, sir, if you will be holding meetings with Nigerians in different provinces, what about the South Africans? There are groupings in South Africa, the KwaZulu, and the other groups in South Africa. Is there any plan for you also to be meeting with such people? Because, society is a society. There are always leaders in every society, in every strata, of society. Do you have such a plan, sir?
Yes, when I said we'll be holding stakeholders meetings, this is to be able to speak at our own levels and at the same time connect it with the South African local communities. Because, and I also told you that even some of the South African communities are reaching out to me to encourage such meetings where they will also come and meet even with Nigerians. The essence of this is to create better understanding that will reduce any form of friction. Because most of the frictions that we have are based more on perceptions. That either that they believe that Nigeria is a criminal, maybe because a few Nigerians get involved. So we want to also assure them that even with those Nigerians that they feel are involved in crimes, we don't support them. The government does not support crime. And of course, what we always tell them is to say that they should not nationalize crime. They should not, because a Nigerian is involved in crime, believe that crime is a national of Nigeria. Crime does not have a nationality. By the meeting, all these meetings we are doing is also encourage Nigerians to also contribute to the communities where they live. Most of these crises don't happen basically in the towns, except the recent ones. It happens more in localities where you have the locals, and maybe the foreigners are fewer in such localities. But when they see that you are also interested in what goes on within the communities, of course, it will build trust. Like Mr. President was speaking recently on this issue, and he said, when you are in Rome, you live and behave like the Romans. So these are part of the things that we are telling ourselves to behave the way that will not create conflict for us in the communities, and also get involved in community development that will make the people to begin to see you as different from what they have been told about you. And these are part of the ways that we believe it will help us to be able to keep the crisis down. Thank you.
Mr. Godwin Adama, let me stay with you. I'm just wondering, have you tried to undertake an assessment or a study of the role of the media, the South African media, in focusing on or aggravating the misperceptions about Nigerians living in South Africa?
Yes, we have seen that, because previously they were not reporting anything positive about Nigerians, but recently, particularly at the time that this was going on, the same day that the xenophobic attacks was going on the 2nd, I got slots in SABC, in Channels Africa, and in ENCA. These are the 3 biggest and important stations in South Africa. They granted me audiences, which made me to be able to explain it in a more better narratives. And I believe that helped a lot. And since then, a number of them have commended me, both from the South African side and the Nigerian side, because it helped to paint a better picture of what was going on. And that particular day, that interview, especially with the SABC, even made deployments to come immediately after that, because a lot of them watch television stations and news. So I believe we are working to see how we can inject some of these positive aspects into their media, and they are cooperating with us on that.
Okay.
All right, I'm just wondering. I mean, Mr. Godwin Adama, thanks. Your stakeholder engagement obviously will have to involve the media. Other than the mega stations you identified a while ago, you also have a number of radio stations. And then, of course, there are the newspapers both in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. We'll return to you, hopefully, in the course of this conversation. Back again to Ambassador Mustafa Suleiman, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, in terms of part of what Malam Garba Shehu said, ticking off some of the gains, moving on businesses, and then trying to get a better foot, as it were, get a better footing in the South African business environment. Are there likely to be implementation challenges? Take this question against the background that we appear to have a clash of either business models or business cultures.
Yeah. Yes, sir. You see, there are likely to be implementation challenges. But first of all, you need to establish, like I said, the framework and operationalize. Now, I want to leverage on what Professor Hakim said. Some of the agreements that we have involve agreements on education, arts, and culture. And now he has raised a very pertinent issue here. That is about knowledge, about information, about engagement. At the local level in South Africa, for instance, I quite agree with him that they need to have agencies like NAWA, or have some educational exchanges, which we have discussed under the education agreement and the arts and culture agreement. So we need to establish it in such a way that when you are implementing, you know the agency that is driving what aspect of those agreements. Of course, because of the disparity or differences between how they operate their government and how we operate our government, maybe the business models also. But we wanted a situation where the business models will converge. The educational and knowledge base will also converge, because that is when you can now exchange information that will serve both, peoples.
No, leave out the business aspect. That was my question. But incidentally, you went back now to knowledge, interaction, and so on and so forth. Fine. I'm not sure what the details of the agreements are, but I hope Nigeria will not be contemplating helping South Africa to set up an equivalent of their own national orientation agency. That would be a waste of public funds. That's one. Second point, therefore, would be in terms of seeking to drive this whole process, with the South Africans. If we are going to be having exchanges, as it were, first of all, what is the standing of Nigeria with regard to its own information management? Godwin Adama is Consul General. Do you have information officers? I mean, we've not had this for many years. Do you have them?
Well, at the consulate level, we don't have information officers, as it were. But the structure itself provides for so many avenues that you can manage information and exchange information. That is given within the consulate framework. The consulate has, like I say, so many competencies around it, and you deploy according to the situation that you have on the ground. Now, the way it's going to work now is that we want to drive implementation through delivery units. Because when you have an agreement and you set out that this is how you are going to implement them, you identify focal persons. You identify focal delivery units. And it will now determine how, if, for instance, we realize that we are lagging in terms of the information unit, for instance, we'll say, okay, have an information officer. And these are the responsibilities and duties that he is going to undertake. Now, it's going to come down to the level of, like I say, operationalization. Now the agreements are there, all the components are there. Now, how do you operationalize? How do you reach out to the lower level? How do you get them to appreciate that, okay, we need to do ABC in order to avert a situation that we have seen before? So critically for us, we are looking for a framework that is lower level framework, that is implementable, that you can operationalize. Taking it away from the processes and programs within the context of saying it's government. Now take it out there and say, okay, people can drive this thing. That's why the stakeholder engagements, the participation of both South African officials and Nigerian officials and our own diaspora communities is key when you are engaging.
All right, that's something you said that just that struck me. When you talk about management of information, you don't have information officers. It is a minus, and if you ask me, and I'm sure our senior professional colleagues here, Garba Shehu and Abike Dabere will agree with me, because Kingsley raised that question because it is very, very pertinent. Because when the xenophobia attack, started, we were getting some wrong information from here and there. People are making use of information they get from the social media. Nobody is sure, no categorical statement, from South Africa. Apart from, of course, what Madame told us when the heat was so much on, was very much on, So we were beaten to that, because if the information had come appropriately, properly managed, of course, we would have had a better way of handling it. Now, on the build-up to this meeting, I'd like to come back to Garba Shehu. I want also to speak to this issue of information management. Throughout the entire saga, or xenophobia saga of last month, how was information managed from Nigeria to South Africa and vice versa? In your opinion, as an information officer, what did we not do right, in terms of managing information when this xenophobia attack, started?
I would say that I would be more critical of the home press, because that is what I read every day. And I must say that the management of the information was below par, because and as you can see from the outcome of this meeting, which is described, by so many people as a spectacular consular and diplomatic achievement by the administration. I've seen notes of commendation from African Union and some other African leaders for saying to the president, you have done Africa proud by the way you have dealt with this matter. But reflecting on the press, you could see that throughout that period, the national press in this country was governed by emotion. And they were calling for blood and severance of diplomatic, recall of this ambassador and all of that. But the president, perhaps seeing what most of us don't see, was looking at the consequences of radical action for South Africa, for Nigeria, and for the entire continent. And so he has decided to say, look, okay, this is the path to go. Let us not do something that is rash, that will generate negative consequences. As for the South African press, I must also say that, yes, there may have been excesses. We have seen quite a number of reporting which is not acceptable. But again, also, we must begin to also look inwards. There are more than 800,000 Nigerians in South Africa. Ask Godwin Adama, I've had him speak on this issue. How many of them are duly registered with the consulate and with the mission? How many of them are there legitimately? And what is this thing about drugs and prostitution? Is it not true? So therefore, we must be critical of ourselves and say that the media would be the whipping boy of everybody. But it's a mirror image of yourself. If you don't like what you are seeing on it, you don't smash the mirror. You look at yourself and adjust. So I think that we have some work to do with our own people over there as well.
Madam Garba, thank you. I just would like to bring in Honorable Abike Dabere-Arewa. I'm wondering now, in terms of perception management, of which information flow is a part, how much do you think we need to do? You can borrow an example from what used to be known as the USIS, which is now a public affairs department or division of the U.S. Embassy, in an environment where you have a large population and there's a great deal of negative perception. I tell you, some of the South African media operatives, I've never been to Nigeria, they hear, I mean, this is just by word of mouth, they hear something and then they slap it on. They are editors and so on and so forth. What do we need to do in terms of seeking, to quietly project the more positive Nigerian image and then hope for, if you like, a sea change in the attitude of a number of these media operatives with regard to what they think is wrong with Nigeria and Nigerians?
Well, yeah, a lot needs to be done in that regard. I agree with you absolutely, because part of the what happened in South Africa was a lot of misinformation. For instance, the first news we got was, the person that was killed by a Nigerian, whereas it was killed by a Tanzanian, and several issues like that. A building was burning somewhere in India, and they said, they're burning properties, MTN properties, whereas it wasn't true. But you see, in this day and age, I think the most important thing is to have a rapid response squad. In other words, you have a team ready. Once an information is wrong, you put it out immediately. Social media travels faster than waiting for network news at 9 or breaking news on television. So there has to be a total approach to information management. And the little we could do in the commission, once that information is negative, we put that immediately and make clear that this information is not true, if we have the correct information. So I think that there must be information officers at every mission abroad. It's one of the things we are recommending. It's very important. And an information officer that is both very knowledgeable, both in the print media and the social media. You find that even states and federal governments now have, on the various levels, information managers. So I think it's very, very important. It's also important to have an offenders register in every mission. Don't think that as a Nigerian, you go somewhere, you commit a crime, you attack somebody, you're going to get away scot-free. You will not. Because we'll be waiting for you back here, in as much as you do other things to make life comfortable for everybody. So yes, information is key, and in today's world of information, bad news travels faster. Good news is quiet. Bad news is loud. So a lot needs to be done in that regard, and I believe that having information officers, although we keep saying, the ministry will say that no funds, but I think it's critical. A lot of funding should go into information management. Otherwise, in fact, the way social media is going, the world may be eventually destroyed, because it really gets to an alarming level. And the thing is, nothing happens to somebody who spreads fake news. So for every mission, for every state, for every country, there should be a rapid response squad that will tackle negative information immediately. So we need to look in that regard, and I think it's very, very important.
I think that's a very good point she made, because if you recall, the returnee we had in Lagos 2 weeks ago said that he was present when the attack had started, the Tanzanian attack, that he was there. And what people now heard was that it was a Nigerian. That's how, from what Abike said, that, social media, it travels faster. Before you knew it, they were already taking on Nigerians and, burning down their property.
Yeah, Kiri, I know you have a question. Part of, when we say information officer, that's just a label. Information will relate to the aspects of culture that, the permanent secretary was talking about. And the information officer will not be one who will be merely issuing press statements to, say, the South African media, or being there to take their calls and then correct information. But it could also be one who will take initiative on certain aspects to promote Nigerian culture, to promote Nigerian positive issues.
Exactly.
I believe so.
Oh, yes. And Professor Hakeem Tijani, let's talk about implementation. It's always difficult to implement bilateral agreements, not just between South Africa and Nigeria, but globally. Some nations will, append a signature on a bilateral agreement, but when it comes to implementation, it becomes difficult. Now, what can be done to ensure that the agreements reached at this meeting will be properly implemented?
Thank you very much on both sides, but I'll start with Nigeria. You see, tolerating one another, understanding one another in this current dispensation, that is the peace diplomacy that brought about this initiative, is important that the issue of information officer, we have to look into it. And as you rightly mentioned, information officer is not just a label or a nomenclature. It could be part of the duties of any of the political affairs, education officer, and what have you. And I think we need to go back to the drawing board at the various embassies or high commission to look into the duty assigned to each of these officers. On the side of the South African, I'm not knowledgeable about the working of the South African foreign affairs or foreign ministry. But for Nigeria, we can take the leadership in terms of, as we did in this peace diplomacy, and then ensure that the issue of information and the dissemination of information trickle down to the locale. That is not just limited to Cape Town or to Joburg or to Lagos, but also to those people that we have identified as being uneducated, ill-informed, not knowledgeable about what has happened in the past. But more importantly is the fact that on both sides, we must embrace the study of the history and culture. I know it took us some few years to get back on our part, that is Nigeria, to get into the curricula, into the schools, the teaching of history at the primary and secondary school. And it really was a difficult thing to do, but at the end of the day, we were able to accomplish that. So any foreign officer must have a knowledge of the history and culture of the people, and as such must be able to disseminate, whether in terms of even economic or these small-scale businesses that we mentioned. It doesn't make any sense for you to just go to a small village outside of Joburg without understanding the culture of the people. And they can only get this information through the embassy. And I think the disconnect between embassy officers must now be a bridge. We must create a bridge arising from this initiative, whereby the nexus of high-powered initiatives not only trickle down, but effectively implemented. Part of the implementation must also include what I call local intelligence report. The information officer or any officer at the embassy or high commission cannot just, go out and be writing or advising the ambassador or the higher up. They must seek and interact with the local people and have their own human intelligence to drive on the success of the initiative thus, identify. But the bottom line is also knowledge. Knowledge and knowledge.
All right. Professor Hakeem Tijani and the other guests, we're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll go ahead with the tweets that we have and then continue with the conversation.
Move now! The red light won't kill you. Move now! To the disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say, I no go dey do them again because change begins with me.
Of the road. I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me pass where they go.
Make they stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Well, we now have some of the tweets that came in here as Nigerians make their own contribution to this conversation. Festus Akimbo, I said, President Muhammadu Buhari's recent visit to South Africa was hugely successful as it produced many agreements that will reinforce the relationship between Nigeria and South Africa. The introduction of 10-year multiple visas for business people and academics will surely ease movement of people between the two countries.
This is coming from a Twitter handle, Cure My Nation. Now, the president has taken a good step as this will end the crisis and also bring development to both countries.
Now, Adejimo Paul Olubumi, Nigerians should know that because they helped South Africans to obtain independence is not a license that they can misbehave and get away with impunity. The Anambra Church massacre related to drug war from South Africa is a sad reminder. Nigerians need to stop fake news. The last xenophobic attack facts on ground showed no Nigerian was killed, but the fake news peddlers kept on saying Nigerians were killed with false video. Truth should be told at all times.
That's right. Nigerians were not killed in the last round, but Nigerians had been killed in the past, beginning with the 2008 xenophobic attacks, by the way.
Exactly.
And their properties were destroyed in the last round of attacks. Now, this is coming from Bilkis Mafe Fagbemi. If the South African judicial system works as it should, most of these criminals wouldn't have returned back on the street to begin with.
Gidedo Lawal Liko says, I believe Nigerians should boldly demand justice to the victims of xenophobia.
Amabala Hababs, Mr. President, as well as Nigeria, played the role of a big brother. The South African government must continue to make conscious efforts at ensuring lives and property of other foreign nationals of black origin, not only Nigerians, are safeguarded and protected.
But Amosi Haruna Adamu, the shuttle diplomacy is imperative to us as a nation, but the only way we can become great in the world is by finding solutions to our internal problems.
Kabi Law, it's a good development. The agreements should be implemented and followed to the letter.
All right, Utulo Sunday, I believe the visit will bring positive turnaround in the lives of Nigerians who are still in South Africa. Nigerians cannot afford to lose any life to xenophobia anymore. South African president should stick to his promises.
Regis Uzoma says our national brand agencies should convert this IK reality to a strategic, mutually beneficial opportunity for bilateral and multilateral growth. Now, this sets an example of true diplomacy in action.
Tayo Akerele says, good effort from President Buhari. He should ensure to make the South African government know in a cautious approach that they have to pay the victims of xenophobia, whether they like it or not.
Festus Akimboyewa, the warm welcome given to President Buhari by President Ramaphosa shows South Africa recognizes Nigeria as a strategic partner. President Ramaphosa must now take robust action to prevent further xenophobic attacks that stir tensions between Nigeria and South Africa.
Delejak Solomon, one positive outcome of PMB's visit to South Africa is the reignition of the strategic relations that exist between the two sister republics and committing the two countries to work together to further enhance close political, economic and social cooperation in the interest of Nigeria's South African people and the continent at large.
Mike Ayankwo, now this is absolute display of maturity and brotherliness. Despite all that happened, our president found it worthy to visit South Africa. Kudos to President Muhammadu Buhari. South African government and citizens should appreciate this new vista of accommodation by respecting not only Nigerians but all Africans.
Yeah, Adejumo actually sounds differently. He said that the visit is timely after the apology letter sent by Ramaphosa. It's now time to move on. But it's important to say that lasting cordiality between the two depends on Nigerians' willingness to stop illicit drug peddling in South Africa. Not all Nigerians in South Africa are drug dealers. You know, we have drug dealers everywhere, including Nigeria. So that's not the reason why.
Yeah, and there are South Africans themselves who are also drug peddlers. All right, let's. By the way, you recall when the attacks were going on, there was the incident of a former South African High Commissioner to Singapore who was an air hostess. She had been busted for being a drug courier in New York and then elsewhere, also in the Far East. Now, Abbas Abubakar Saad has this tweet. Now, we are happy with the diplomatic actions taken by the two leaders. This has further demonstrated understanding between the countries, despite the fact that some miscreants were trying to sour the relationship.
Raji Afid Abidemi, kudos to President Buhari for making that peace trip, and I believe it was fruitful. But as far as I am concerned, marriage is not by force. If South African president wants peace truly, he should want the citizens of South Africa. What they did last time was barbaric.
Now, Sonny Michael Obakoje has this tweet. One revelation from President Buhari's visit to South Africa was that were it not for the visit, President Ramaphosa would not have taken proactive measures to curtail xenophobic attacks on other nationals. This is sad. Perhaps I wish President Buhari had made this visit earlier than now.
Usman De Abubakar. Of course, the president had a successful outing while in South Africa. However, South African elders need to educate their youth more on what transpired before their independence. In the same manner, Nigerians in South Africa must conduct themselves with decorum.
Okay, so before their independence, South Africa got their independence way before the transition to democracy in 1994. All right, now Prince Vikade says xenophobic attacks on Nigerians and other African countries should be tackled seriously, and no amount of memorandum of understanding which does not consist of compensation to the affected people should be considered enough to pacify the people who lost their lives and properties.
Now, finally, President Buhari, that's coming from Mutana Farouk. President Buhari's visit to South Africa is a pacified remedy that healed wounds. I urge all parties to keep to their words as the entire African continent looks forward to build a united and formidable economic bloc for the benefit of all. God bless you all. Kingsley, there's one aspect that we are yet to talk about.
Which is?
Those who returned to Nigeria, they came back because they were forced to do that. They may want to return to South Africa. And there are those who have lost their property. So, is there any way the agreement accommodated all of this? You know, who thinks that there? But
you see, now the main agreement that Nigeria and South Africa will be working on is the early warning mechanism. Now, the early warning mechanism, despite the way it sounds, is going to have various components, and some of these components may include consideration for remedies in such a situation. But because there has to be an agreement between the two parties to be able to say, okay, at what point do we take what responsibility? And we should understand that what happened was more of a spontaneity. And managing spontaneity all the time, you need a lot of if you like, programs to be able to deal with spontaneity at that point in time. But essentially, the early warning mechanism will define the parameters for engagement at such a situation when you have losses of either life or property. But key to it also, in our discussion, we have had issue of documentation, issue of the missions knowing which Nigerian is where, which Nigerian is doing what. Because those are key issues. If you want to talk of compensation, you have to define how you can arrive at a compensation.
Yeah. It's not captured in the agreement in Nigeria, because this is a negotiation. It's a negotiation. People lost their. As a matter of fact, some people have been reduced to nothing after this happened, because there were most of those Nigerians are traders, and they have wares displayed, burnt down cars. Electronic, the product from that. This is a huge capital, right? So if it's not captured, many Nigerians will think that, well, we had an agreement, but who pays? Who pays for such things? Because those people are going to be,
Usually, first thing you do when you have a situation like this, which the mission is doing, is to undertake an assessment. Okay, you bring yourself forward to the mission and say, okay, I'm a Nigerian doing business in South Africa. This is the type of business. This is the worth of the business. This is the value. This is what I have been doing for this number of years. And now the shop is burnt. Okay, you will take the documentation, take an assessment, and you say, okay, we now have 20 Nigerians who lost businesses or who have done this, and their value is this and this. That was why I was referring you to the issue of when you define an agreement on trade relations, for instance, you may be looking at the bigger corporations, the MTNs, the ShopRite. And now for us, our concern is the small and medium enterprise, because these are the people who are doing small businesses. They are not quoted in terms of insurance coverage.
That's right.
They don't have, insurance coverage against some of these, incidences.
Well, Mr. Permanent Secretary, I think, Kirian, this is something perhaps we may have to look at in greater detail once we get into the planning session with, the big bosses upstairs with regard to understanding the nature of the business relationship between Nigeria and South Africa. Madam Garba Shehu was talking about it. There's a structural imbalance. The South African business environment is highly formalized. And on the other hand, we have more of informality in ours, typified by a wide range of MSMEs. So how then do you forge that kind of relationship? And then what needs to give for that to proceed? But there's one issue that has also emerged from all of this, and it was one of the points touched on in the course of the 3-day interaction between the two countries. I'm going to Lagos now. Honorable Abike Edabiri Erewa, the issue of lawful migration. The Permanent Secretary was saying, look, we have to have data of presence. And from what we know, I mean, if my passport may bear Kingsley, and indeed it does bear Kingsley, and I'm Kingsley, but in some cases I may not be Kingsley. So how do we deal with the issue of lawful migration? I know that persons will raise the question of Chapter 4 jurisprudence, freedom of movement. So you can, once you have a passport and you have some dollars in your pocket, you take the next flight out, nobody cares. What can we do at the sending end, if you like? So people ask you a few questions, usually SSS or so, we ask you, where are you going to? Once you answer the question, they allow you to go. But what can we do? Because some of these persons who are out there don't turn out to be good reps of the true Nigeria. And you've interacted with a good number of them, I believe.
Well, thank you. You can't stop migration, regular or irregular migration, but a lot can be done to minimize it. There was a question I asked in South Africa. There was this guy who came to the hotel, very tactily dressed and all that, and he said, the way he greeted me, I said, you brought this here, like an area boy kind of mentality. And we were now asking, how do these kind of people get to South Africa? Because the genuine businessman who wants to go and do a business, it will be difficult to get a visa. But those who have no business, how do they get their visas? So we're looking at that, and we're told that some even go through Mozambique. You don't need a visa to get to Mozambique. And then you go through the border and all that. So it's something that there has to be relationship amongst those countries to ensure that the borders are properly managed. I mean, when we talk about Libya and all that, you talk about going through the desert and all that. So I wanted to know about this case of South Africa, how people do get there. So I think this is something that, all our countries should look at. Yes, there's an ECOWAS free movement where you can go anywhere once you have a passport. And then again, you find that all the noise about Nigeria, a lot of times, most of these people are not Nigerians. There are many cases where you're not a Nigerian, but because we're the largest, it's like, oh, I'm a Nigerian. And that's the first thing that comes to the mind. So it's an area that a lot of attention should be paid to, but you cannot stop migration, legal or illegal. But what I tell a lot of people is that now it's getting more difficult. If before you could get away with it, now it's more difficult. So why don't you regularize migration? I mean, when you look at some places where we have issues with, they need your services. It can be made, we can have laws that make it possible for you to properly regularize your stay, go there properly, do the work you want to do properly, rather than get into trouble. So you've touched the critical area of concern that should concern all of us as Africans. Yes, you can move around freely, but what about those who are getting into trouble doing that? So it's very critical. And then back to the issue of returnees that you spoke about. Well, I know that there are some who says, well, I want to go back there, but then it's their personal decision. But the most important thing that a lot of them are happy to be home. A lot of them are saying, thank God I'm even alive. There's a widow who came with her 4 children, and she's already getting a lot of support. So somebody called my staff and said, just give me money, I just want to go anywhere, maybe Dubai or anywhere. And he told him it's not worth it. It's not good. You're going to get into more trouble. So again, education, awareness is very important. More awareness, NOA and other agencies should go out there. We are doing our best to ensure that, tell people the truth. Ignorance plays a critical role here. As the Prof said, information is power. Ignorance is a major disease. So we need to tackle all that in moving forward, especially with our own people. It's not what going out there. There are opportunities here. There are areas you can do. And when we follow up with the returnees, you'll see what they're doing. The governors are getting involved. They're doing needs assessments. Beyond the initial funding they received, phone cards and recharge cards, a lot more will be done for them. And then, so hopefully we follow up with them and they'll have no regrets about coming back to their country.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. What she just said, reminded me of what the chairman of APIS told us here, that there are people who have been there for 10 years just because they don't have the wherewithal to return to Nigeria. And that was one of the reasons why he offered, his facility, to bring them back. Well, on this note, lady and gentlemen, we come to a close on this conversation. Well, we believe that perhaps as time goes on, there may be reasons for us to return again to look at the agreement and, of course, what has happened after that. So on that note, I'd like to, first of all, appreciate Nigeria's Consul General in South Africa, who is now in Namibia. I'm talking about Godwin Adama. Sir, it's been a pleasure talking to you once again on this xenophobia issue. Thank you very much indeed for reaching us. And Mustafa Suleiman, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs. It's been wonderful talking to you this morning. All right. And of course, our own Garba Shehu, the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity. Garba, thank you very much for always honoring our invitation on matters of this nature. I'm Professor Hakeem Tijani, Professor of Diaspora, Peace and Labor Studies. Thank you also for sharing your thoughts with us on this program. And of course, our own Honorable Abike Dabiri Rewa, Chairman, CEO, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on, of course, educating Nigerians and some of the issues arising from the meeting. Thank you very much indeed for coming.
All right, Kieran, that's next for us. We'll take a look at sports with Nigeria's Ese Brume winning a bronze medal at the just concluded IAAF World Championships in Doha. Plus, Novak Djokovic increases the size of his cabinet with his 76th career title in Tokyo, Japan.